The last day of school arrived wrapped in golden light and calm winds. You could feel the difference in the air, like something had settled after a long storm. The usual buzz of kids counting down minutes to summer felt lighter this year. Not rushed, not desperate, just present. We stood in the school's courtyard, waiting. Ava walked out of the building slowly, her backpack bouncing against her back, one hand gripping a single envelope. Her teacher, Ms. Keating, stood behind her, smiling with a quiet kind of pride that didn't need words. As Ava reached us, she handed me the envelope and said, "That's my answer." We opened it together, standing in the soft breeze. Inside was a card Ava had made herself. On the front was a simple drawing, a path that forked into two trails. One led to a shining city, the other, a garden blooming wild with flowers. On the inside, in her careful handwriting, were 4 words: "We stay and grow." I looked at Marcus. He smiled, not the guarded kind we'd grown used to wearing these past months, but a real, full smile, one that said, "She chose," and we were at peace with it. That weekend, we held a small celebration in the backyard. Nothing big, just family, a few close friends, and some of the parents from the coalition. There were lawn chairs, lemonade, paper plates stacked with grilled food, and laughter that came easy. Ava wore a crown of her own making, woven from dandelions and ribbon, and danced barefoot in the grass. At one point, Tanya Mitchell pulled me aside. Her son Elijah was playing tag with Ava and 2 other kids, laughing, completely carefree. "You know," she said, "a year ago I was thinking of moving too. But because of you all, I feel like I can stay. Like this place might finally be worth the fight." I nodded, swallowing the knot in my throat, because I knew what she meant. This hadn't just been about one child, one incident, or even one school. It had been about history, about all the doors that were quietly closed, about all the times we were told to wait, to soften, to shrink. But we didn't shrink. We showed up, and we stayed. Later that evening, as the sky turned pink and the kids lit sparklers in the yard, Ava sat beside me on the porch. She leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "Mommy, do you think things will stay better?" I thought for a moment before answering. "Not always, but now they know you'll speak up. That changes things." She was quiet, then whispered, "Do you think other kids will speak up too?" I smiled. "I think you've already made space for them to." And she had. The Voices for Every Child coalition was stronger than ever. The district had begun recruiting more teachers of color. The curriculum updates were being implemented ahead of schedule. More families were coming to board meetings. More students were raising their hands, not just in class, but in life. And most importantly, Ava was herself again. Not a symbol, not a victim, just a kid. A kid who had walked through fire and come out with her light intact. Months later, when a journalist reached out again for a 1-year later story, I told him no. Not because I didn't want the story told, but because the story had already been lived. It belonged to the people who heard Ava's voice and found their own. To the parents who decided to speak up. To the children who drew their families in full color and dared to show the world. And to every Black child who has ever been asked to shrink, to be less, to sit down, to stay quiet, I say this: you are not too loud. You are not too sensitive. You are not imagining things. You are not the problem. You are the revolution. The story ends not with applause, but with resolve. The kind that doesn't fade after the news cycle ends. The kind that lives in policy changes and playground laughter. In classrooms where every child sees themselves reflected. In teachers who finally listen. And in principals who know better now. Ava still walks the same school hallways. But now, she walks taller. Because she knows who she is. Because she knows her worth. Because she knows her voice matters. Even when it shakes. Especially when it shakes. Closing voiceover for video. This story isn't just about one school or one family. It's about all of us. About what happens when injustice is disguised as protocol. When fear is used to silence truth. And when a system expects you to endure quietly, but you choose to speak. If you've ever been made to feel small, erased, or unseen, this story is for you. Not just as a warning, but as a reminder. Your voice is powerful. Your presence is protest. And your dignity is not up for debate. Spring came quickly that year, as if the earth itself was ready to shed the cold. Trees bloomed early, and sunlight poured through the windows like a promise. We were 3 weeks from the end of the school year. 3 weeks from Ava's decision. 3 weeks from knowing whether this chapter would close or continue. The house was quieter than usual. Not sad, just reflective. Marcus spent more time in the garden, hands buried in soil, like he was trying to plant peace. I found myself journaling at night again, sorting through thoughts the way I used to in law school, line by line, searching for clarity. And Ava, she'd started drawing again. Not people this time, not classrooms, just colors, swirls, storms, sometimes bold, sometimes quiet. One afternoon, I found her by the window, sketching in her notebook. She didn't look up as I walked in. "Are you nervous?" I asked. "A little," she replied. "It feels weird, knowing you can leave something, or stay and keep fixing it." That was more honest than most adults I knew. She flipped the page and showed me a drawing, just a circle filled with scattered pieces of paper, floating in the air. On each paper was a word: belonging, fear, brave, home. "What's this?" I asked gently. "It's what I'm thinking about," she said. That night after dinner, we got an email. It was from a name we hadn't heard in a long time. Ms. Conway, the substitute teacher, the one who'd made the comment about Ava's family drawing. She was reaching out to us, privately. No media, no school board. Just a short message. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Harris, I was recently shown a clip of your daughter speaking. It made me reflect. I owe you, more importantly, Ava, an apology I should have given a long time ago. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to say I was wrong. My silence hurt your child. My words hurt your child. I see it now, and I'm ashamed of who I was in that moment. If Ava is open to it, I would like to write her a letter, or simply listen if she has something to say to me. With regret, Catherine Conway." Marcus read it aloud twice. We both sat in silence afterward. We didn't rush to respond. Instead, we printed the message and gave it to Ava the next morning before school. She read it quietly, lips moving just a little as she took in each word. When she finished, she didn't say anything. She just held the paper in her hands for a long time, staring at it like it might shift into something else. Finally, she spoke. I want to write her back. So she did. Her letter was simple. "Dear Ms. Conway, thank you for writing. I remember what you said about my drawing. It made me feel small, but I don't think you're a bad person. I think you didn't know how much words can hurt. I'm learning that grown-ups don't always know what to say. I forgive you. I hope you learn more now. Ava." We sent the letter. We never heard back, and we didn't need to, because that wasn't about Ms. Conway. That was about Ava, reclaiming her voice, releasing the weight. 2 days later, something else happened. After school, Ava came home holding a folded piece of notebook paper. No envelope, no name on the front. She handed it to me without saying anything and walked into the kitchen to grab a snack. I unfolded it carefully. It was from Connor, the boy who had laughed at her drawing, who had asked if she got the principal fired, who had looked at her like she didn't belong. His handwriting was shaky, a little messy, but the words were clear. "Ava, I didn't understand what I did before. I didn't know what it felt like for you. I was just trying to be funny, but it wasn't funny. I'm sorry. You're really brave. I see you different now. I hope you stay at our school. Connor." I showed it to Marcus that evening. He nodded slowly. "That's a real apology," he said. No one made him write it. Ava didn't mention the letter again. She didn't need to, but she taped it to the inside of her notebook, behind her newest drawing. It was a picture of two kids standing on opposite sides of a cracked wall, each holding a brick, not throwing it, just holding it, facing each other. In those final 2 weeks of school, the air felt different. Teachers smiled more openly at Ava. Students she barely knew invited her to join games at recess. One girl brought her a flower crown made from clovers and said, "You remind me of a queen." On the last Friday of the term, Ava came home with a small folder. Inside was her final writing assignment. What I want to be when I grow up. Her answer? I want to be someone who makes space. Not a job with a desk. Just someone who makes space for other people to be seen. Maybe that's a writer, or a teacher, or just a mom. But that's what I want. That was the moment we knew. It wasn't about staying or leaving anymore. It was about what she had already become. Not because of the fight, but because of how she stayed whole through it. My name is Danielle Harris, and Naved's email came on a Thursday afternoon, just as the sun was beginning to dip and golden light cooled across the kitchen floor. I was reading over client notes, half distracted when the subject line caught my eye. Brookwood Education Foundation Honors Night nomination notification. At first, I thought it was spam, but as I read it again, I felt a strange knot form in my chest. The message was from the foundation director, informing us that Ava and our family had been selected to receive the Community Courage Award, an annual honor given to those who inspire change through acts of bravery in the face of adversity. I read the email twice before calling Marcus. His reaction was quiet. "She deserves it," he said. But is she ready for it? That was the question. Because recognition isn't always reward. Sometimes it's just another spotlight, another chance for people to whisper behind your back. When we told Ava, she didn't smile like we expected. She looked at us and asked, "Do I have to give another speech?" "No," I said quickly. "Only if you want to." She nodded. "Okay, but this time, can I talk about something happy?" I blinked. Of course. And that's when I realized Ava was tired of being the symbol of pain. She didn't want to be the brave girl who survived racism over and over. She wanted to be the girl who helped make things better. The girl who told stories of healing, not just harm. At the awards night, the auditorium was full. School board members, teachers, families from across the district, even press from a statewide education magazine. The program listed Ava's name alongside two teachers and a high schooler who had organized a food pantry for students in need. When her name was called, the applause was thunderous. Ava walked up to the stage in a white dress and silver flats. She held a small note card in her hand and cleared her throat into the microphone. "I used to think grown-ups didn't care," she began. "When people were mean or when things weren't fair, it felt like no one was going to fix it. But then, something weird happened. People listened. Not all of them, but enough." She looked up, eyes scanning the audience. "I'm still a kid. I don't have the answers. But I know what kindness feels like and what it doesn't. And I just think schools should feel kind for everybody." That was it. No dramatic pause. No fiery close. Just a simple truth delivered by a child who had earned the right to say it. As she stepped down, people stood. Not out of politeness, but out of awe. After the ceremony, a journalist approached us with a camera crew. "Can we do a follow-up story? Maybe a feature piece?" he asked. People are really moved by her journey. Marcus stepped in before I could answer. "She's not a story. She's a child." The man raised his hands, apologetic. "Of course, I understand." But he didn't. Not really. Because even as the world clapped, we were exhausted. Not just from the fight, but from always having to explain the fight. From always being strong. From always being careful. The truth was, we were tired of being brave. At home, the weight settled into our walls like dust. The kind you don't notice at first, but it starts to coat everything. Marcus started sleeping later, his smiles fewer. I caught myself staring blankly at the window during client calls. And Ava, though stronger than ever, had stopped drawing for fun. Her sketch pad sat untouched on her desk. One night, I sat in bed scrolling through an apartment listing 2 towns over. Bigger schools, better arts programs, a district with a reputation for diversity and progressive leadership. Marcus saw me. He didn't say anything, just took the phone, looked at it, then placed it face down on the nightstand. "I've thought about it too," he finally whispered. Leaving wasn't about running. It was about resting. But it also felt like surrender. And that's what tore at us. Because we had built something here. The coalition, the policies, the change. Ava's name had helped transform an entire district. Could we walk away from that? Or did we owe it to ourselves, to her, to finally breathe somewhere new? We brought it up with Ava over pancakes that weekend. If we moved, Marcus said gently, you'd have a new school, new friends, a fresh start. Ava cut a strawberry in half thinking, but who would help the other kids? I exhaled. There will still be people here. We didn't do this alone. She nodded. Then, can I have until the end of the year to decide? I looked at Marcus. We both smiled. You get the final say, baby, he said. This is your story too. And that night, as the wind picked up outside and rain tapped softly against the glass, I thought about everything we'd been through. The meeting, the phone call, the fear, the headlines, the hate, the courage, the cracks, the whisper of one little girl saying, maybe they'll listen this time. They did. And now, the question wasn't whether to leave, but whether to stay and keep building, or leave and finally live. R thought a parent-teacher conference would turn into a police incident. My husband Marcus and I had lived in Brookwood, a small suburban district just outside Atlanta, for over 8 years. We chose the neighborhood for the quiet, the safety, and what everyone said were good schools. We'd worked hard for this life. Marcus was a senior electrical engineer, and I ran my own small law practice specializing in civil rights cases. We were not strangers to injustice, but we believed we had found a place where our children could just be kids. Our daughter, Ava, was in the 4th grade at Brookwood Elementary. Smart, sweet, and a little shy. She loved books more than screens and ballet more than sports. But for weeks, she'd come home with a face that didn't match her spirit. She said things that didn't make sense. Mommy, why does Ms. Turner always call on me last? Or, why did everyone laugh when I read out loud? I chalked it up to growing pains at first, maybe kids being kids. But then came the day she came home in tears, clutching her backpack like it was the only safe thing in the world. It was a substitute teacher that day, Ms. Conway. According to Ava, the woman had asked the class to draw pictures of their families. When Ava presented hers, us, smiling at a cookout with her grandparents, Ms. Conway made a face. Oh, that's very colorful, she reportedly said, loud enough for several children to hear. Some snickered. One boy even whispered, that's a lot of people on welfare. Ava didn't understand the full weight of that sentence, but she felt it deeply. Her teacher didn't correct the students. She didn't apologize. She moved on, as if none of it mattered. That was the last straw. Marcus and I scheduled a meeting with the principal, Dr. Ellen Whitmore, to address what had been happening. Not just this incident, but a pattern of subtle, persistent exclusion and bias our daughter was enduring. We prepared. We brought printouts of Ava's journal entries, summaries of conversations we'd had with other Black parents in the district, and a letter Ava had written herself, describing how she often felt invisible and weird at school. We didn't come to shout. We came for change. The meeting started like any other. Dr. Whitmore's office smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and tension. She was polite, smiled too hard, nodded too much. But it was clear from the beginning she was more interested in defending the school than understanding what we were saying. We take all complaints seriously, she said, folding her hands like a news anchor. Brookwood is an inclusive environment. I'm sure Ms. Conway meant no harm, but she did harm. Marcus replied firmly, his voice calm but tight. And this isn't about one substitute. It's about a climate. Dr. Whitmore shifted in her seat. Climate? Ava doesn't feel safe, and she's not the only one, I added. We've spoken to other families. Their children are dealing with similar microaggressions. The curriculum lacks cultural representation. The books in the classroom are mostly Eurocentric. This isn't about blaming teachers. It's about fixing a deeper problem. There was a pause. Dr. Whitmore blinked. Once, then twice. Well, she said slowly, perhaps you should consider that you're projecting a narrative onto the school that simply isn't there. My heart dropped. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. Like we were making trouble. Like we were looking for racism under every rock. We're not here to argue, Marcus said, standing up. We're here because our daughter deserves better. That's when things took a strange turn. I think I've heard enough, Dr. Whitmore said, reaching under her desk. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Excuse me? I asked, stunned. I feel threatened, she said, her voice loud now, shaking. You raised your voice. No one's yelling, Marcus said, confused. I'm calling security, she snapped. And the police. I stared at her, not comprehending. You're calling the police on us? For asking questions? But it was already happening. She was on the phone, using that shrill, manufactured panic that far too many Black people know too well. I couldn't believe it. After everything we'd handled with grace and professionalism, she was painting us as aggressors, as a threat. The narrative flipped in seconds. We waited outside in the school lobby, stunned, humiliated, but not broken. Our daughter was somewhere in that building, unaware that her parents were being criminalized for advocating for her dignity. When the police officers arrived, we knew the script. Be calm, be clear, be unshakable. They spoke to us like we were suspects until they realized we had committed no crime. Just parents, Black parents, standing up for their child. Word traveled fast in Brookwood. By the time we reached home, 3 other parents had already texted me variations of the same shocked message. Is it true the principal called the cops on you? I didn't respond right away. My hands were still shaking, not from fear, but from rage buried beneath restraint. Marcus paced the kitchen like a storm trapped in a bottle, mumbling half-thoughts and scenarios. We knew what had happened, but the question was, what were we going to do about it? The next morning, I called Ava's school to excuse her absence. She'll be out for a few days, I said. The secretary paused, clearly aware. Yes, ma'am, she finally said. Understood. I could feel the weight of gossip hanging in her voice. Our names were already the talk of the faculty lounge. We didn't speak much that morning. We didn't have to. We both knew the next step. As a civil rights attorney, I'd handled dozens of cases involving racial discrimination, but I had never imagined being at the center of one, certainly not involving our own daughter. But now it was personal, and I had no intention of letting it pass. By noon, I had filed a formal complaint against Principal Ellen Whitmore and Brookwood Elementary with the county's Department of Education. The complaint was thorough, documented incidents, witness names, Ava's letter, and most importantly, our recording. Marcus, always diligent, had set his phone to record before we entered the principal's office. It wasn't illegal. Georgia is a one-party consent state, and that audio clip would prove that neither of us had raised our voices, used threats, or acted aggressively. That recording was our shield, and now it was our sword. That same evening, I received a call from another parent, Tanya Mitchell, mother of Ava's classmate, Elijah. Her voice trembled. "Danielle, I heard what happened. I need to talk to you. Please." Within an hour, she and her husband were sitting in our living room, holding hands like people on the verge of confessing something painful. "Our son, he's been coming home crying for weeks," Tanya said. "He said the kids mock his hair, his skin. He told the teacher once, and she told him to stop being sensitive." Her voice cracked. "We thought maybe he was just struggling to adjust." "No," I said, my heart sinking. "He's not alone." We spent hours talking. Then it was like the floodgates opened. Parent after parent, message after message, all of them Black, all of them with stories, microaggressions, biased discipline, token diversity events, but no real representation. A few parents had already tried speaking up, but were brushed off, dismissed, even accused of hostility for simply pointing out facts. The pattern was clear. The school had a culture of silence and retaliation. It was Marcus who first said it aloud. "We need to go public." I hesitated, not because I feared backlash. I'd lived through worse, but because going public meant exposure. It meant putting our family in the spotlight. It meant opening ourselves to scrutiny, attacks, and doubt. But more than that, it meant putting Ava at the center of something much bigger than any child should have to carry. But Ava, she surprised us. When we explained what had happened and why she'd be staying home, she was quiet at first. Then she said something that stopped me in my tracks. "Maybe if people know, they won't laugh at other kids anymore." She was 9, and already more courageous than most adults I knew. So we did it. We released the story in a local parenting forum first. A long, respectful, but damning post, detailing the timeline, our concerns, and what had unfolded in the principal's office. We attached an edited version of the audio, only the relevant parts. We changed no words. We didn't need to. Within hours, the post had spread to Facebook. By the next day, it was on the local news station's website under the headline, "Brookwood Parents Say Principal Called Police Over Racism Complaint." The school district released a short, careful statement. "We are aware of the concerns raised and are currently reviewing the matter in accordance with district procedures." It was the kind of cold, legal sanitized response I'd seen dozens of times. But they weren't going to handle this one behind closed doors. The media requests came in waves. Local outlets, regional radio, even one national news blog that covered school equity issues. We turned most of them down. This wasn't about fame. This was about accountability. That Monday, we attended the school board meeting. We didn't go alone. More than 30 parents showed up, many of them Black, a few from other backgrounds. All of them tired of pretending. One by one, they spoke, calmly, respectfully, but powerfully. Story after story. A girl accused of cheating because her test scores were too high. A boy given detention for talking back when he asked why he got punished. And his white classmate didn't. A mother who was told her tone was the problem when she questioned her daughter's suspension. The air in the boardroom was heavy, not with anger, but with truth. When it was my turn to speak, I walked up to the podium with Ava's drawing in my hands, the one that started it all. The cookout, the colors, the smiles. "My daughter made this," I said, holding it up. "A teacher made her feel ashamed of it." The children laughed. The teacher did nothing. And when we tried to protect her, we were treated like criminals. The day the district released the findings of their investigation, the sky was gray. The kind of gray that made everything feel heavier than it was. Marcus sat at the kitchen table, refreshing the district website every few minutes while I brewed a pot of coffee I knew we wouldn't finish. At 10:43 a.m., it appeared. Conclusion of independent investigation into Brookwood Elementary incident. The statement was long, wrapped in polished legal language, designed to say everything and nothing at the same time. But buried within the paragraphs was the core. The investigator found that the principal's decision to contact law enforcement was not supported by credible evidence of threat or danger. The response was deemed disproportionate, and not in alignment with district de-escalation protocols. In plain terms, she was wrong. Dr. Ellen Whitmore's contract would not be renewed. She would be reassigned within the district, but removed from any direct involvement with students or families during the remainder of her employment term. It was, in the eyes of the district, a resolution. But to us, it was unfinished business. Because nowhere in that statement was there an apology. Not to us. Not to Ava. Not to the other families who came forward. They hadn't denied what happened, but they still hadn't truly acknowledged the harm. The district tried to move forward. They announced a new equity training program for staff. They released a revised code of conduct for racial harassment complaints. They invited community leaders to participate in a listening session that sounded more like a PR strategy than a path to healing. And then, a few days later, we received a letter from the school board. It invited Ava to speak. Not us, Ava. The letter explained that the board was organizing a public session on student inclusion and mental wellness. Several students from across the district had been asked to share their perspectives. They said Ava's story had sparked this initiative, and that her voice mattered. We read the letter out loud to her after dinner. She was quiet, thoughtful. Then she asked, "Will they really listen this time?" I didn't know what to say, but Marcus leaned in. "They will if you speak from your heart." So she said yes. The day of the board session, Ava wore a soft yellow dress with small white flowers. She wanted to wear something that felt light, she said, not like the gray days before. We arrived early. The auditorium buzzed with voices, press, parents, teachers. There were cameras, microphones, and rows of stern-looking board members at the front. I held Ava's hand while she waited for her turn. Her fingers trembled, but her back stayed straight. When her name was called, she walked slowly to the microphone, eyes scanning the crowd, heart thumping so hard I could hear it from my seat. She unfolded her paper, took a deep breath, and began. "My name is Ava Harris. I'm 9 years old. I like dancing and books, and I used to like school." A hush fell over the room. But then some things started happening that made me feel like I didn't belong. Like when I raised my hand and never got picked. Or when kids laughed at my family drawing and no one said anything. Or when my teacher told me to stop talking so much, even though I wasn't. She looked up from her page. I told my parents because I didn't want to be sad anymore. They tried to help me, but instead, someone called the police on them. I thought school was supposed to be safe, but I didn't feel safe. A pause. I don't want other kids to feel like I did. I want schools to have teachers that protect everyone and books with people who look like me, and rules that are fair for all kids, not just some. Her voice didn't shake, not once. When she finished, there was silence, heavy and real. Then someone stood up and clapped, and then another, until the entire room rose to their feet. I cried openly, not just because I was proud, but because in that moment, the story changed. Ava wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a witness, a warrior, a truth teller. After the meeting, a reporter approached her gently. "How did you feel up there?" Ava shrugged and said, "I just said what was true." That quote made the morning headlines. I just said what was true. It became a rallying cry, a message, a mission. The school district's tone began to shift. The board president issued a statement the next day. "We thank Ava Harris and the other student speakers for reminding us why we do this work. Their courage compels us to look inward and do better." Better wasn't immediate. Better never is. But the wheels started turning. Brookwood Elementary announced a full curriculum audit. Parents were invited into equity review panels. The PTA, once a rubber stamp body, became a forum for real discussion. And teachers began requesting books that reflected more diverse voices because they knew kids were watching. And Ava? She started smiling again. Not because everything was fixed, but because she knew she had changed something. One night, while tucking her into bed, she asked, "Do you think the school will be kinder now?" I thought for a moment. Maybe. But even if it isn't yet, you showed them how. She nodded and turned over. pulling the blanket to her chin. That night, I wrote in my journal. They tried to make her small. She showed them what power looks like. I let the silence do its work. We are not asking for special treatment. We are demanding basic humanity. Some people clapped. Others sat frozen. But the message was received. By the end of that week, the district announced a formal investigation into Dr. Whitmore's conduct. She was placed on administrative leave, pending review. A small step, but a step. Still, this wasn't over. Because racism doesn't retreat after one meeting. It doesn't crumble under a hashtag. It hides. It adapts. It waits, though we thought things would feel better once Dr. Whitmore was placed on leave. But the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was pressure. The calls slowed down. The texts grew shorter. The initial wave of support that had surged through the community began to ebb, replaced by something more fragile. Hesitation. Whispers. We could feel the undercurrent. People were watching, waiting, calculating which side to stand on now that it might cost them something. The school didn't reach out, not even to check on Ava. That, more than anything, made my blood run cold. No counselor called. No teacher concerned. Nothing. Ava had disappeared from their world, and no one noticed, or worse, no one cared. At home, Ava seemed fine on the surface. She did her schoolwork, watched her favorite ballet videos, and played quietly with her little brother. But there was a stiffness in her that hadn't been there before. Like she was waiting for the next moment to prove that something wasn't safe. Every time she passed her old backpack in the hallway, she looked away. One night, I sat beside her in bed. "Sweetheart, do you want to talk about anything?" I asked. She shook her head, but then whispered, "Is Ms. Whitmore mad at me?" That question shattered something in me. "No, baby. You did nothing wrong. But the kids at school are saying I got her fired." There it was, the cost of truth. Even at 9, Ava was already bearing it. "She's not fired," I explained gently. "She's being looked into because some things weren't okay. And you didn't make that happen. Grown-ups are responsible for their own actions." She didn't respond. She just curled into me and fell asleep with her fingers clutching my wrist like a lifeline. I stayed there long after she drifted off, staring at the ceiling, wondering how many other children were learning the same lesson in silence. Be quiet. Stay small. Don't speak truth or you'll become the problem. Meanwhile, the investigation was in full swing. We received a letter from the district office requesting an in-person interview. They were bringing in a third-party equity consultant to review the case. The letter was stiff, procedural, but it confirmed what we already knew. This wasn't going away quietly. Marcus and I met the consultant, Dr. Julian Reed, at the district headquarters. He was soft-spoken, middle-aged, and wore round glasses that kept sliding down his nose. But his questions were precise. He had reviewed the audio, our complaint, Ava's letters, and surprisingly, he had also spoken with other parents who had submitted their own concerns following our story. He leaned forward during the meeting and said something I hadn't expected. "This isn't the first time Brookwood Elementary has been mentioned in racial equity audits, but this is the first time it's gone public." That stopped me. "You're saying this was already known?" He nodded slowly. "There have been red flags, disproportionate discipline data, lack of inclusion in curriculum audits, but nothing ever escalated past internal reports." "And now?" Marcus asked. "Now the board can't ignore it. But that means pressure is mounting from both directions." It wasn't a warning. It was a truth we already sensed. We were in the middle of a quiet storm. The kind where change is possible, but only if you survive the backlash. Over the next week, things got harder. I received an anonymous email. No sender, no signature, just 5 words typed in all caps. "You people ruin everything." Then a call to my office with heavy breathing and a whispered slur before the line went dead. Marcus found nails under his car tires 2 mornings in a row. Coincidence? Maybe. But we stopped believing in those a long time ago. Even worse was the feeling that some of our own neighbors were turning cold. People who once waved in the driveway now looked away. One woman at the grocery store leaned in and said, "You know, my kids go to Brookwood." and they've never had a problem. Maybe you're just overly sensitive. I didn't reply. I just walked away, clutching the apples I hadn't realized I was bruising in my hands. But in the midst of all this, something beautiful happened too. At our door one evening stood an older woman, Ms. Geraldine Thomas. She introduced herself as a retired school librarian and longtime Brookwood resident. "I read about your daughter," she said, "and I want to help." She brought with her 2 boxes of books, children's books with Black heroes, Black history, Black joy, stories Ava had never seen in her classroom. "These should have been on every shelf a long time ago," she said, "but I want your girl to have them now." Ava lit up when she saw the titles. She ran her fingers over the covers like they were treasures. In that moment, something inside her began to unfreeze. We weren't alone. A few days later, a group of high school students from the district's Diversity and Inclusion Club reached out. They had read about the incident and organized a Stand With Eva campaign. They wore t-shirts with her name. They passed out pamphlets about equity in schools. They wrote letters to the board. They started something that wasn't about just one girl. It was about a whole system that needed to change. And Ava, quiet, reserved Ava, stood in our living room, holding one of their letters, her face glowing. "They're standing up," she whispered. "Yes, baby," I said, smiling through tears. "Because you stood up first." The official district investigation entered its 3rd week. Every day felt like we were holding our breath. And then the principal spoke. Not to us, not to the board, but to the press. It began with a headline on a conservative local blog: "Principal under fire for doing her job." The article quoted Dr. Whitmore extensively. Her narrative was clear. She was the real victim. "I felt unsafe," she claimed. "I was confronted aggressively. I feared for my well-being. My actions were purely for my protection." It was shocking how easily the story flipped. The blog ran an accompanying opinion piece calling the investigation a witch hunt and suggested that parents were using race as a weapon. It accused us of targeting a respected educator for political gain. And worst of all, it questioned our parenting. Are these the kind of adults we want influencing our school system? I read it twice. Not because I needed to believe it, but because I had to understand the game we were now in. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about narrative warfare. Later that week, the district superintendent, Dr. Alan Purvis, held a press conference. His words were measured, but we could hear the political tightrope in every sentence. "Brookwood Elementary remains committed to the safety and dignity of all students and staff," he said. "We are cooperating with the investigation and ask the public for patience as we conduct our internal review." Not a single mention of Ava. Not one word of regret. Just a promise to listen to all sides. All sides. Even the side that called the police on 2 parents for simply "I wasn't going to speak," she began. "But I've seen too much silence around here. I've seen how students of color get treated. I've seen how we excuse it. And I've seen how we make parents the enemy when they speak up." The room fell still. I believe Ava's parents. I believe Ava. And we should all be asking why a child felt unwelcome in a place designed to nurture her. It was a crack in the wall. A small one, but visible. After the meeting, Ms. Keating approached us quietly. "If you need more testimony for the investigation," she said, "I'm willing." We thanked her. And as we turned to leave, I saw something in Marcus's expression. A flicker of relief. Maybe not hope yet, but something close. Back at home, Ava was sitting at the kitchen table, reading one of the letters she had received. It was from a girl named Nia, age 10, from Maryland. "My teacher told me my hair was distracting. I wanted to cry. Then I saw your story. I don't feel alone anymore." Ava looked up at me and said, "Can I write her back?" I smiled. Of course you can, because in a world trying to erase her voice, she was choosing to lift others. And that, more than any news headline or district statement, was the beginning of real power. Ava's speech didn't just echo through the walls of Brookwood Elementary. It spilled over, reaching corners of the district that had long been quiet. Her words lit a spark, and that spark began to travel. Within 2 weeks, a group of parents from East Haven Middle School contacted us. They asked if we would be willing to meet. Your daughter gave us the push we needed, one mother wrote. We've been biting our tongues for too long. That Sunday, we met at a local community center. Just 6 families at first. It was casual. Just folding chairs in a circle and a few pitchers of lemonade. But as each person spoke, it was clear. Ava's story had opened the door to a much larger truth. One woman, Latasha, said her son had been repeatedly suspended for attitude, even though teachers couldn't point to specific actions. Another father, Jordan, described how his daughter was placed in the lower reading group despite testing far above grade level. They said she needed to work on behavior first, he explained bitterly. I asked what that meant. They couldn't tell me. Story after story followed. Different kids, different schools, but the same underlying issue. Black children being told, explicitly or subtly, that they didn't belong, didn't fit, didn't measure up, and their parents being told, in careful language, to stay quiet. But no one wanted to stay quiet anymore. What began as a support circle evolved into a district-wide equity coalition. We called it Voices for Every Child. The name wasn't poetic, but it was pointed. It was for Ava, for Elijah, for the ones who hadn't spoken yet, for the ones who didn't know how. Word spread. More parents came. Teachers, too, quietly at first. Some were afraid. Others had seen the backlash we'd faced and worried about their jobs. But one by one, they started to step forward. I've been silent for years. One teacher confessed at a meeting. I didn't know how to challenge the system without risking my position. But after Ava, I realized I couldn't live with my silence. We began collecting stories, not rumors, not hearsay, documented incidents, letters, reports, patterns. The data was undeniable and devastating. In one school, 78% of disciplinary referrals went to Black students, though they made up less than 30% of the student body. In another, not a single book assigned in literature class featured a Black protagonist. In yet another, the only Black teacher in the building had been reassigned to monitor lunch duty after she raised concerns in a staff meeting. We compiled it all into a dossier. Broken mirrors, a report on racial disparities in Brookwood School District. The report was sharp, precise. It didn't point fingers. It held up a mirror. We presented it to the school board in a formal session. There were no cameras, no applause, just silence as page after page was read aloud by parents, students, and educators. When it ended, one board member, Ms. Tran, a quiet woman who rarely spoke, leaned into her mic and said, "This isn't just a report. This is a call to conscience." The board promised action. This time, it felt real. Still, there were consequences. The backlash hadn't disappeared. It had just grown quieter, more strategic. Flyers appeared in mailboxes accusing equity activists of promoting division. Anonymous accounts flooded social media with claims that parents like us were anti-school or anti-teacher. But we had grown used to the fire. We knew truth had a cost, and we weren't paying it alone anymore. Ava started receiving invites to speak at youth events. She read a poem at a Black History Month program that made grown men cry. She stood on stage with high schoolers twice her age and held her own like she'd done it for years. She even visited a nearby school where a little girl ran up and hugged her tightly, saying, "I saw your speech online. I wrote one too." But Ava remained Ava. At home, she still asked if she could have extra syrup on pancakes, still danced in socks across the hardwood floors, still got nervous when she had to answer the door. She was growing, yes, but she was still a child, and we never lost sight of that. One evening, after a particularly long coalition meeting, I found her curled up on the couch watching an old cartoon, her eyes drooping with exhaustion. "You okay, baby?" I asked. She nodded, barely awake. "Just tired of fighting sometimes." I kissed her forehead. "Then rest. We'll carry it for a while." That night, I wrote an email to the coalition. Let's remember, our children don't owe us activism. They shouldn't have to carry our courage. They only spoke because the grown-ups didn't. Now it's our turn. Let's not stop. The response was overwhelming. One mother replied, "Thank you for saying this. My daughter has been afraid to speak. Now I understand. Maybe she's waiting for me to go first." And that was the shift. This wasn't just Ava's story anymore. It was a movement, a turning, a reckoning. And it had started with a single drawing, a cookout, a smiling family, a child's vision of joy, mocked in a classroom, dismissed by an adult, and defended by parents who refused to be silent. They had tried to criminalize our love. Instead, we turned that love into a revolution. The first official change came in the form of a document, Brookwood Unified Equity and Accountability Framework 2025 Rollout. It wasn't flashy. It didn't come with fanfare. But when we opened the 23-page policy, we knew it was the beginning of something real. It outlined changes we'd been demanding for months, years, in some cases. Required cultural competency training for all staff, equity audits twice per school year, new curriculum guidelines that mandated inclusive literature and historical accuracy across all grade levels, a bias reporting tool with third-party oversight. It wasn't just promises. It was process. The district also announced the hiring of a full-time director of equity and inclusion, a position that, until now, had existed in name only, shared part-time by a district secretary with no formal authority. And at the center of this shift, Ava's name quietly held weight. No one said it aloud in those policy meetings, but we knew. They weren't just reacting to a problem. They were responding to a story, a face, a voice, a moment that forced them to look inward. But change doesn't land evenly. Not everyone welcomed it. At a town hall held a week after the policy announcement, a group of parents stood up and loudly objected. "You're shaming our community." One father shouted, "You're making our kids feel guilty for being white." A woman in pearls and a pastel sweater called the equity plan radical indoctrination. And then, quietly from the back, a teacher raised her hand and said, "No one's trying to shame your children. We're just trying to make sure mine are safe too." The room fell into a stunned silence. Because that's what truth does. It disrupts. Outside the school walls, things were changing. But Ava's story still lived inside those walls, in the small things. In who got picked first in class, in which books sat at the front of the shelf, and how the adults corrected harm or ignored it. We decided it was time for Ava to return to Brookwood Elementary. It wasn't an easy decision. We debated for weeks. We considered transferring her, homeschooling her, even moving out of the district entirely. But Ava surprised us again. "I want to go back," she said simply. "I want to see if it's better now." And so, on a quiet Monday morning in April, she walked through the school's front doors, shoulders squared, backpack strapped tight, hair braided neatly down her back. Miss Keating, now promoted to vice principal after the previous VP quietly retired, greeted her at the door with a warm smile and a hand on her shoulder. "We're so happy to have you back, Ava." But not everyone was ready to smile. 2 days later, Ava came home unusually quiet. She sat on the couch without turning on the TV, just picking at a loose thread in her sweatshirt. "What happened?" I asked, sitting beside her. She didn't look up. Connor was in class today. Connor, one of the boys who had laughed at her drawing all those months ago. The same boy who'd whispered something cruel about welfare. "He didn't say anything this time," she continued, voice flat. "He just looked at me, like I was a ghost." I waited, letting the silence speak. Then at lunch, he came up and asked if I was the one who got the principal fired. He said his mom was still mad about it. There it was again, the weight of someone else's shame placed onto a child. "What did you say?" I asked gently. She looked at me with eyes that were far too grown for her age. I said, "No, the principal got herself fired." And just like that, I realized something. Ava didn't need saving. She needed witnessing. That night, Marcus and I sat down with her. "You don't owe anyone explanations, baby," he said. "But if you want to say something, anything, we'll always have your back." She nodded. And the next morning, she made a decision. After lunch, she walked up to Connor at recess. A teacher stood nearby, watching. Ava waited until their eyes met. then walked closer and said calmly, "You laughed at my drawing. You said things you probably don't even remember. But I do. I remember all of it. And I don't hate you. I just hope you learn." Connor blinked, stunned. He didn't speak. He looked down at his shoes, mumbled, "Okay," and walked away. Later, the teacher told us what she saw. Your daughter didn't yell. She didn't accuse. She just spoke truth, and it landed like thunder. No, Ava didn't change Connor's world in that moment, but she cracked something. And sometimes, a crack is all it takes. Meanwhile, the Voices for Every Child Coalition was gaining real traction. We had chapters forming in 2 nearby districts. Teachers from other counties were asking to use our report template. Even a university research team contacted us to request permission to include Ava's case study in a publication on student advocacy. But Ava didn't care about any of that. She cared about her library finally adding books where the characters looked like her. About her teacher asking how to pronounce a new student's name properly. About her classmate, Lily, drawing a picture of Ava's family for show and tell and saying, "They look like fun." That was the revolution she was interested in. The quiet one. The everyday one.